Sådan. Velkommen alle sammen tilbage her til teatersalen. Det er med stor spænding, vi alle har set frem til næste punkt på programmet. Vores næste taler er nok en af vores tids største autoriteter, når det kommer til global ansvarlighed. Han fik Nobels fredspris i 2001. Han er tidligere generalsekretær for FN fra 1997 til 2006. Og så har han stået fadder til The Global Compact. Det var nemlig hans tid som leder af FN, at de 10 principper blev til, og som vi i dag forsøger at leve op til. Hvordan han ser på CSR i dag, hvor langt vi er nået, hvad vores udfordringer er i fremtiden, spørger jeg ham om i et interview om lidt. Først vil han selv sige et par ord. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give a very warm welcome to Mr. Secretary General Kofi Annan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And I'm also happy that she did a straightforward introduction briefly without saying this is a man who needs no introduction. Because one hears that a lot, but don't always take it for granted. And I'll share a story with you. When I stepped down as Secretary General, my wife and I decided we were very tired and we were going to take a bit of a break. And indeed, you don't know how tired you are until you stop. And we realized we were. So we borrowed a friend's house in Como, and it was next to the forest, and so we could always walk into the forest and take a long walk in the woods without going to the village, remaining incognito and hiding there. And I had also decided that we were going to remain very quiet, no TV, no radio, no newspapers for about 3 months. But after 6 weeks, I began to get bored. So I told my wife, let's go and see if we can get a newspaper. So we walked into a tobacconist shop, and within minutes, a group of men in one corner were staring at us, and one of them broke off and made directly for me. So I turned to my wife and said, oh my gosh, we have 6 weeks to go, and we've blown our cover. How do we manage the village if we go there? By then, the gentleman was on top of me, and he put his hand out and said, Morgan Freeman. May I have an autograph? So I said, sure. And I signed K. Freeman. He was very happy, and we were very happy. And my wife said, and besides, you are now a free man. So one shouldn't walk around thinking everybody knows you, you don't know introduction. That's what you get. Anyway, it's really, really wonderful to be here with you. And let me say, Your Royal Highness Joachim, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to be with you today to discuss how we can together build a healthy, sustainable societies. It is a mark of importance attached to this goal and this topic that this conference has attracted so many distinguished audience. I also want to add my warmest congratulations to all those nominated for awards this year. This recognition shows how determination to raise your sights and consider the wider impact you have on society and the environment. By demonstrating that it is possible to combine economic development with environmental sustainability and social progress, you are setting an example which others must follow. For only by combining these three objectives successfully can we move to sustainable trajectory and hand over a future that future generations will consider fairer, more secure, and this is what is urgently needed. This is an approach where Denmark is taking a strong lead. This country and the neighbors often find themselves at the top of global list measuring equity and citizen well-being. Denmark, like any country, faces problems and stresses. New challenges arise and old ones remain. But you have built over generations a prosperous, peaceful, and inclusive society. According to the recent survey, there is no country where corruption has less of a grip than your country. That is quite an achievement. On protecting the environment, you have also set high standards and bold ambitions. With around a fifth of your energy already provided from renewable sources, you have given yourselves a target of achieving independence from fossil fuel by 2050. Nor does your leadership and solidarity stop at your borders. Denmark is among the handful of countries that has met the 0.7% target for development assistance. In fact, you are above 0.80. And when I met the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Development, I got a badge which I'm wearing very proudly. It says, I love G07. That is the 5 countries that have attained the 0.7 goal, which was set by the world. And Denmark is a member of that exclusive club of 5. It is a record which collectively you can take huge pride. Your determination to help tackle global problems and advance human development is shared widely, including in the business community. The number of Danish companies that have adopted the UN Global Compact has increased 5-fold since 2008, and this is a remarkable achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, your example, your values and leadership are needed as never before. I am by nature an optimist, but across the world, there is real cause for concern. Despite real progress, we seem certain to miss many of the Millennium Development Goals. In a world of plenty, 1 in 8 people still live in extreme poverty. 7 million children will die this year from diseases we have long had the power and knowledge to prevent. 57 million children are denied the chance even to attend primary school. And while the worst of the global financial crisis is over, its impact can still be seen around us. We are seeing growing inequality of income and opportunity, both within and between nations. And it is the young people, the young who are paying the highest price for the mistakes and negligence which led to the economic crisis. These challenges are being made worse by a rapidly deteriorating environment. We continue to recklessly abuse our planet and ignore the fact that its resources are finite. We continue to consume the resources of the world as if there is no tomorrow. Forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 million acres every year, an area 3 times the size of Denmark. We are increasing our water use at an unsustainable rate, Yet 1 in 5 people already live in areas with water shortages or which are water stressed. 1/3 of all the food we produce is wasted, while 750 million people go hungry every day. And we continue to pollute our atmosphere, freshwater supplies, and the oceans. Far from falling, global CO2 emissions are almost 50% higher than in 1990. Rising temperatures and extreme weather events are already affecting every continent. We can see the consequences all around us. They are displacing communities, heightening competition for resources, and raising national and regional tensions. According to a recent study, climate change is already costing the world more than $1.2 trillion a year. That is about 1.6% of the global GDP. But this is just a taste of the costs and challenges we have to face unless we act now. As climate change turns productive land into desert or dust bowl and reduces harvest, we will need to increase food production by 70% by 2050 to meet the needs of population growth and increased demand. My dear friends, these statistics clearly demonstrate that current patterns of economic growth are putting an unprecedented stress on the Earth's ecosystems, with potentially devastating outcomes for human well-being and life generally. So as we begin to shape the post-2015 global development work, the global development framework, what is needed to build a sustainable future? What should we do? And above all, how can we ensure that sustainability is placed at the heart of decision-making so that it is tackled with the urgency and on the scale that is needed? First, we need to set ambitions clearly. We need a set of ambitious sustainable development goals which set out what we must do together for the well-being of the planet and for generations to come. Economic development should aim to eradicate extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and promote environmental sustainability. We need to recognize the strong connections between these three objectives and understand that each cannot be achieved in isolation. We already know, for example, from the Millennium Development Goals, how crucial gender equality is for reducing poverty and improving health. Second, we must understand that achieving the Sustainable Development Goals depends on good governance at all levels: local, national, regional, and global. This leadership must begin but not end at the political level. It is governments which have the primary responsibility to promote development and set regulatory frameworks in a way which protects the healthy functioning of the Earth's ecosystems. But this requires political leaders to think about long-term benefits beyond the short-term electoral cycle. Tax reforms, for example, is needed to encourage sustainable investment and manage production and consumption patterns in a way which takes into account our impact on our natural resources and on the environment. The right incentives must be put in place to drive energy efficiency and ensure a shift to renewable sources of energy. This shift to sustainability also requires governments and official agencies at every level to be responsive to their citizens' aspirations and needs. Third, sustainability requires the leadership and responsibility of business alongside the public sector and civil society. It is the private sector, which is the main motor for the world economy and which accounts for 2/3 of the use of our natural resources. Companies should support sustainable development goals in practical and measurable ways in their policies, their production processes, and engagement with stakeholders. They should refrain from lobbying against and from political activities that might endanger these goals. Business, including small and medium-sized enterprises, have to drive the research and technological advances which are critical to overcoming the challenges I have talked about. Even on an issue as global in its reach as a climate change, it is the private sector, with a wider framework set by governments, which will identify and deliver the solutions we need. It is business which can help, for example, harness Africa's rich potential for solar and wind energy. It is the private sector, as is happening here in Denmark, which will make the increased investment in resource-efficient production and new technologies to reduce waste and increase clean power generation. But it is also important that this knowledge and technology be shared on preferential terms with developing countries, and that businesses give back and create opportunities wherever they operate. As far-sighted business leaders have long understood, such decisions are neither altruism or charity. It is also the realization that healthy, sustainable businesses depend on peaceful communities and healthy environment. So businesses, as we see today, are increasingly accepting that corporate social responsibility is essential for the bottom line, that doing good is good for business. It can help deliver benefits which range from improved efficiency and larger markets to improved staff morale and public trust. I said earlier that I remained an optimist. I don't doubt the scale of the task, but we should take confidence from what we have achieved. Looking at what we have learned from the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs, it is clear that much can be accomplished through partnerships. We need to work together across national borders and across sectors to identify and deliver the solutions for sustainable development. Look, for example, at how the partnership between governments and the private sector and civil society and academia and foundations has transformed the health of millions of people. Over the last decade, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria has saved over 9 million lives. New HIV infections have been cut by over 20%. Malaria deaths in Africa, the continent where it remains a huge health problem, are down by 1/3. Tuberculosis is killing 40% less people than it did. We have also seen how mobile technology, driven by innovation of the private sector, has ended one of the great divides by giving millions in the developing world access to information, networks, financial, and other services. We must also remember that delivering healthy societies and sustainable economies brings its own new opportunities. Denmark is now reaping the benefit of new jobs and technological leadership from being one of the first countries to set about greening its economy. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to find the same vision and determination to tackle global problems. In an interconnected world where we have many challenges, when challenges and threats ignore borders more than ever before, we must remember that we are all in the same boat. We sink or swim together. I urge you to export the common sense of purpose and shared community, which is the foundation of Denmark's success around the world. Let me pause here and thank you for sharing this session with me and inviting me to give you some of my ideas or share my ideas with you. As we are going to continue in the conversation, I will pause here and continue from the armchair. I'm not tired, but that was the arrangement. That was the arrangement.
Consider over there. Thank you so much for your speech. I would like to elaborate a bit on some of your points, and thank you so much. I can say, I think, for many of us, for the kind words that you gave to Denmark, according to our leadership in CSR. If we take an overall look for the whole world, how are we doing worldwide in implementing these CSR strategies now that we need to have this sense of urgency that you were speaking about?
It's a very good question. I think some parts of the world are doing better than others, but the world has gone through a crisis which has had real impact on the young people. Following the financial crisis of 2008-2009, people became disenchanted and disillusioned, not just with political leadership, but also with corporate leadership, particularly the banks. I travel a lot, and sometimes people believe that they've been led down by the system, by their leaders, corporate and political. They've been brought up to believe if you work hard and if the company is making money, you keep your jobs. Today they see many companies making money, but they are losing their jobs. You have lots of young people who are unemployed. You have people who are unemployed, and sometimes they ask you, when I can't pay bills for my mother or my grandmother, nobody can help me. The government tells me they have no money. But the banks get into trouble and they find billions to save them. And then you try to explain, well, you need a credit system. Credit's like the blood. And they don't see it that way. That the 500 euro they needed, that nobody could give it to them. But we can find billions. So this leads to a certain lack of trust. Public trust is in question. And this is why companies that are reaching out, trying to help solve problems of society, trying to take on young people or create new areas. And really, honestly, it's the small and medium-sized companies that often create most of the jobs. We tend to look at the big companies, but really the energy and creation of jobs is at that level. And I'm also excited to see some of these young people who come out of school and don't go out looking for jobs, say we're going to start our own company. We're going to be our own boss, and I think that spirit. And so there's good and bad news, as it were.
So these new companies are doing things in a new manner.
They're doing
And how is that manner different compared to the old world, if we can call it that?
I think there's a different mindset and a shift of mind. They don't think in hierarchical terms. You know, they want to get it out there. They want to share information. They have the tools. But it is also important that we all realize that some of the issues we talk about, some of the social media and all these things are tools. I was quite surprised when the Arab Spring happened in North Africa, from Tunisia to Egypt to Libya. People were referring to social media revolution. And I told them, no, those are tools. You can use the tools to achieve your objective, but you must know where you're going and what it is that you want. Otherwise, you're not going to make much progress. The 1989 Tiananmen Square, for example, was a fax. The students had fax. The government clamped down on radio, television, nothing was in, but they were sending messages to each other by fax. Today is social media. I don't know what it will be 10 years from now, but these young people are changing our world with some of the creations they've come with, and in a way, it has also unsettled quite a lot of those leaders who like to control the situation, who like to control information. It's extremely difficult, and that is why I think we need to engage the young people. We need to talk to them. They need to become involved in decision making. We have a tendency to say they are too young, but they are not too young to create tools for us to use, which is changing our world. And honestly, if you're sick, you see a doctor. If you want a legal opinion, you see a lawyer. But when we want to think for the youth and do something for the youth, we don't consult them. Why not?
So the young people should be more inside of decision making then in those terms, because it takes some time for them to be older and become decision makers. But in the meantime, we are in a bit of a hurry. As you were telling us, we have huge challenges at the moment. What do you see as the greatest challenge, if we see it in the terms of CSR, to implement all these fine ideas that we have, but still are very difficult to implement?
I think the biggest challenge facing us is the environment. The environmental. We have Syria, we have all sorts of conflicts, but the environment is a real threat. I know you in Denmark know a lot about this. You had the big conference. You prepared for it. The world was not ready. But climate change is a threat. It's an all-encompassing threat to our health, to our food production, to our way of life. And we really need to find ways of combating it. We need to be creative. We need to be innovative. And I notice collectively we've not been able to come with a global agreement to deal with it. And yet individual countries are paying the price, particularly some of the smaller countries which had nothing to do with the pollution. But big ones like China, when you see the pollution issues in China, are beginning to take it seriously and do something about it. They are coming up with an environmental program which is important, and I suspect we are going to see this where country by country, the population will be demanding that their governments act on the environmental threats. But we cannot stop there. You cannot do it country by country. We need that global agreement. But we should press our political leaders and our social systems to really tackle this environmental issue. There's not enough energy behind it. I firmly believe that if the population and the people were to engage seriously on the environment, our leaders would take action. If we can put it up the political agenda, they will take action. And I also believe that when leaders fail to lead, the people can make them follow. And there are good examples these days around the world.
Because this is what we're seeing at the moment. This is also the discussion we're having about legislation. Which comes first? Yeah. Is it the political level that are moving quicker than, for instance, the business world? You mentioned the business world as being, going forward before legislation. Here in Denmark, we have what we call a soft legislation on CSR. Is it realistic to go further than that? Than we have gone, with harder laws that make businesses implement CSR or environmental issues?
I think the creative and the imaginative business leaders are not going to sit around and wait for a government to pass a law before they act. They analyze, they do their research, they do their market research, they know what is coming up the line. And often they would, through their own research and their own analysis, will take decisions which can be helpful for the environment and helpful for business. It helps if the government puts in place the right regulatory systems which facilitates innovation, research, and business development. But I would urge companies, when they see an opportunity that will help sustainability and the environment, not to sit and wait for a government, or they won't anyway. They will go ahead and do it. And in a way, perhaps it's easier for them. They have a managerial and decision-making autonomy that the politicians and the political elites don't always have, because they have to consult a lot. They have to go to parliament. Business leaders can take their decisions. They have the resources. So sometimes it's a bit easier. And in some situations, given their own influence, they can also influence the political process, just as I was saying, the people can.
If we go into motivation for businesses to implement CSR and be more responsible, does it matter what the motivation is, as long as they do something? Because you mentioned about simply doing good, or should we do it because of a PR strategy? Does it matter?
Obviously, often they have shareholders who have probably invested $1. And every year they will come and tell, has my dollar made $2? And so the business people have to bear that in mind. But they also have to remember that people also have power. Individuals have power. They have power in the choices they make. They have power in what they decide to buy, how they spend their money, which companies they will support, or which products they will walk away from. And companies learn. In fact, I was reading a study recently saying that car purchasing has gone down in Europe because the younger people are not buying cars, they are bicycling. It's healthier, it's cleaner, it's environmentally correct. And if you're a businessman, you pay attention to that too, and make sure that maybe you get them a more efficient and better bicycles, and really move away from the fossil fuel vehicles that we use.
And that's the consumer level, that consumers can lead also, but we've also seen an age where consumers have been leading by consumption and really consuming a lot.
And sometimes being encouraged to consume.
Exactly, yes. But can you see it the other way around, actually? Sometimes, as a consumer, for instance, I didn't know how a smartphone would change my life. It started with business. They put out something that I needed afterwards. Do you see this being led by consumers, or do you see this led by businesses themselves with the visions that businesses can have?
I think you have two types. You have businesses that are creative, innovative, and spend lots on research and thinking long term, and are not thinking immediately of how much we can sell. And that comes later, and usually that is an interesting way to go. You also have those who are in the consumer business and want to sell. Not only want to sell, design things in such a way that every 2-3 years you have to change, you have to buy a new one so that they can keep going. And the governments are sometimes also at fault, not the governments in the sense that the economy is saying we have to encourage consumption, local consumption, to grow our GDP. And sometimes go out to create conditions which really pushes the people to spend. I mean, we had a situation where the US was considered the most debt-ridden, where people really lived on credit cards and some had 10, 5 credit cards. Now Korea beats US. Koreans live on much higher credit than the US, because it was also a sense of we're growing the economy and encouraged to do it. And so when you get into that sort of deliberate encouragement to consume, and companies are also feeding it, the waste of resources becomes a real problem.
But the consumers often lead now, and we have an economy which is built on consumption in order to grow and in order to create more jobs. And this is the dilemma at the moment, because we need to get out of the financial crisis, at least start growing a bit more. How do you see this growth vision when you see it through sustainability? How can we manage to get a sustainable growth and at the same time have enough GDP to also create new jobs?
Yeah, no, I think over the last decade or two, economies in certain countries around the world have really changed. There hasn't been that much investment in productive end of the economy. In some cases, okay, services have done well, but sometimes they package papers and you pass it around and you sell it and people make lots of money and you see impressive figures and you think one is doing well, but they are not producing, they are not creating jobs in that sense. And if we were to do some of the things that I'm saying, that we need to factor in the environmental cost of some of the consumption. If we did that, you will see that the way we consume will come down quite drastically. I mean, for example, when I see countries offering huge subsidies for gas, for petrol, when you look at the economic aspects, it's not only unsustainable, but it's such an attack on the environment. If you were to get them to pay the real environmental cost, it would probably be about 2 or 3 times as much. But no politician is going to do that because elections are around the corner.
So they think short term, but in some cases, when we look at more the global scale, we have been consuming quite a lot, we can say, the last 50, 60 years since the Second World War. And now we see these problems. And then we come to the developing world saying, now you're getting into the middle class and you want to consume the same way as we did, but please don't, because you actually ruin the environment. How do we come together in this climate issue without being imperialistic in our way of almost teaching China, the other BRIC countries
I think we have to accept that the older developed countries were and are responsible for the historical accumulation of greenhouse gases. But the new ones also have responsibility. And so that's why I like the term equal and differentiated responsibilities. That yes, the developed countries must cut, but so should the developing countries, particularly the emerging developing countries, the countries that are doing well, from Brazil to South Africa to India, because if they don't do it, others will use it as an excuse not to move. So we all have responsibility. The question of determining who does what and how much, rather than saying you go first, and nothing happens. And I think it ought to be possible to get the peoples around the world to accept this collective responsibility with the understanding that some will do more than others. I mean, some people want to go per capita. I don't think that's the way to go. But I think we can come to an understanding that the emerging countries, particularly the BRICS, can do more. Perhaps not as much as the older, to begin with. The older countries have to start, and the others have to come in. Yeah.
But isn't it understandable if you take the view from an individual, from the middle class in Brazil or South Africa, that they now can afford to have the goods that we have been enjoying for years, that they want to have this? How are we going to...
Yeah, but there is a fallacy there. Mm-hmm. They seem to think, and even not only in the developing world, many people seem to think that the greening of the economy or measures to improve climate change or to mitigate against climate change will reduce growth. I don't think that is necessarily true. You have economists on the other side who believe that when greening of the economy really takes off, it's going to have an impact as big, if not bigger, as the Industrial Revolution. And in effect, your experience here in Denmark shows that your attempts to do something about the climate change, to do something about clean energy, and to innovate has not really harmed you. You are doing very well compared to those who believe if they do that, they will lose growth. And so it is a fallacy, and these countries should really accept that sometimes taking the measures, leapfrogging some of the mistakes the older economies have made, is in their long-term interest.
We are a small country, and we might have seen some good visions there and leading ahead, but how can we export this and make, for instance, China listen to Denmark with our visions?
You'll be surprised how much they look around. And they are probably looking at some of your examples. No, they are very open when it comes to learning positive examples. And in fact, it's not just China. Other countries do learn. And good lessons doesn't necessarily come from big countries. Being big has nothing to do with greatness. If you come with a great idea and it works, people will follow. And I'm sure your dynamic corporate leaders are traveling the world. The Chinese, the African leaders, they're also traveling and looking around. And some of the innovations you have here will find its way to places around the world. Particularly if you hold the patents, you would also do very well.
Yes, that's on the innovation. Mm-hmm. We've been talking a lot about partnerships. Physicists from IPCC, Daniel Kahneman, talks about partnerships. How do you see this partnership idea in respect to the development of new ways of doing things?
No, partnership is very important, and we've seen situations where governments and the private sector have come together and done great things, or government and civil society. I mentioned in my statement the progress one has made in the area of health, HIV/AIDS. I mean, I recall when we set up the Global Fund, I had hoped that we would get money not just from governments, but from individuals and from the private sector. In fact, the first check that went into the fund, which since its inception has raised about $22 billion, was a check that came from me. Not that I have money. I won a prize. I won a Hilton prize for $100,000, and so I put it in to say less individuals, corporations, and others. As it turned out, governments were the main supporters. In fact, surprisingly, the first check I got came from George Bush, who really, and to show
Senior
how...
or junior?
Junior,
Okay.
junior. But what is interesting is politicians are amazing. A day before I went to the White House to see Bush, I was talking to Clinton. And I said, I'm going to talk to Bush about supporting me on this global fund and giving us money for it. Without batting an eye, Clinton says, Kofi, you know what? I hope he does this. This may be one of the most important things he does in his term. Almost gave me the impression if he was there, he would have done it. Bush didn't bat an eye or that. He gave $200 million, the first check. The NGOs were very upset, saying that the president had forgotten several zeros. It should have been 2 billion and not 200. Anyway, but he did it. But years later, he came up with his own program, PEPFAR, which was 5 billion a year to fight AIDS. And but the point I'm coming about the partnership is we didn't get much contributions from the companies, but I decided to engage the pharmaceutical industry. And so I invited chairmen of the 7 largest companies to a meeting in Amsterdam. I had with me Dr. Gro Brundtland, who was then head of the World Health Organization, and Peter Piot, head of UNAIDS. And my message and appeal to them was simple. You have medication that can save the dying. The poor cannot afford it. At that time, it was $15,000 per patient per year. Today, it's $150,000. So I said, to have medication that can save life, but the poor dies because they cannot afford it, and you are not going to do anything to cut the prices to make it affordable to them, and yet you are insisting on keeping your intellectual property, your patents. I said, you're going to have an uphill battle. I, for example, cannot defend that sort of position. And at that time, in fact, they had a case in South Africa against Mandela, because Mandela had threatened to use compulsory licensing to manufacture generic version of the diseases to save his people, and millions were affected. Millions were dying in Southern Africa. So I told them, I'm not a public relations expert, but if you go and sue Mandela in a South African court on an issue like HIV/AIDS, if you lose, you lose. If you win, you lose and lose and lose. So what's the point? Take the case out of the court, settle it privately, and get it done, which in the end they did. But the discussion was interesting. One chairman said, I don't know why I should be in this meeting. We could be accused of price fixing. So I said, but price fixing is when you collude to maximize your profits. Here I'm asking you to lose money. I'm asking you to cut. So who is going to take you to court for that? The other fellow said, my lawyer is not even here. We went back and forth, but in the end, they responded. And it made an incredible difference. The price, we said, package it differently for Africa and Asia. They said if we package it different and it's cheaper, it will come back to Europe or America as black market. All those arguments were dropped and they did it. And in the end, medication like nevirapine, which prevented mother-to-child transmission, which was the cruelest of all, to have this baby born into the world, they were giving it away free. So they made an incredible contribution, this private-public partnerships, working with the government, setting up clinics. It was quite amazing, and that's a wonderful example of public-private partnerships. And the companies came from all around the world.
I also come to think about what we spoke about a few minutes before, in which what comes first, the ability and wanting to do good in business, or does profit come first? If you do good, if you have that as your primary goal, Is it like this, and then manna will
Yeah.
fall from the skies?
I think any serious businessman who wants his business to be sustainable and be part of sustainability and has put sustainability at the center of his work cannot focus only on profits. He may have to argue with his board and shareholders, but he will have to explain to them that to be sustainable, we need to go this way, we need to do this. If we focus only on profits, we may do okay in the short term, but in the long run, we will lose out. And so my judgment will be sustainability should be at the center. And in fact, if you work it out well, it also helps profits. And profits not just for this quarter or the next 3 years, but further down.
I was actually going to ask you now to give an advice, but you almost started on your advice to all these people that are gathered here who are business people from Denmark and who are concerned about CSR and want to have good ideas and how to implement it in their businesses. What would be your advice with your overview, with your experience and your visions also from the Global Compact? What would be your advice?
I think it depends obviously in the situation of the company concerned. But what corporate leaders have been surprised by, and I was very pleased about, is that they discovered that when they get into social corporate responsibility and they take on some of these projects, their staff, the workers, are very excited about it. The workers are pleased. And they are pleased, first of all, to be associated with a company that is doing the right thing. The community in which they operate also feels it and appreciates what the company is doing. And I think corporate leaders and companies should be careful not to get caught in a situation where they say, this is what we do, this is our business. I think they should constantly ask themselves, what should we be doing? The environment is changing. We need to make adjustments. And once you ask, what should we be doing? Bearing in mind what's happening around you, you will adjust and often take the right decision. It is very difficult to ask the question, what should we be doing? Because once you ask the question and you get the answer, you may need to go a different direction. You know, there's a story about a scientist who had an experiment. He was using the white rats for the experiment. After 5 years of that experiment, he decided he had become more mechanical than the rats. So he designed a new experiment, and for the new experiment, he selected a pigeon, put it in a cage, and further decided that he needed a starved pigeon. So he fed the pigeon on water for 2-3 days, then mounted an apparatus that introduced colored food pellets into the cage at an absolutely random process. When the first pellet was introduced, the pigeon was standing on its left leg. When the second one was introduced, it was flapping its wings. When the third one went in, it was on its right leg. In no time, the pigeon was doing a very energetic dance, thinking it has something to do with its well-being, welfare, and the introduction of food. But you see, if that pigeon had been a man, and you walked up and said, Kofi, stop all this dancing, this energy, it has nothing to do with your welfare. I probably say, leave me alone, I'm too busy to listen. So we go through life often doing the pigeon dance, not realizing we are doing it. And when we realize it, we don't know what to do. And so this question of what should we be doing, it's a difficult one, but one should.
Earlier on in one of the side events, we discussed that maybe businesses at least should maybe find one thing that they can do good by and not many things. Do you see that as a way forward, that you define one thing that has something to do with your business and then you go with that?
I think it depends on the industry, and it depends on what you are. Some companies have done extremely well by doing that one thing. Some countries have collapsed by doing that one thing, saying this is our business. I'll give you an example. There was a company in America called Penn Central Railway Station. Penn Central was the biggest railway station, railway system in the US, had lots of real estate and everything. And their attitude was, our business is rail, our business is rail. So, sticking with rail, planes came, air freighting came, that's not our business. Our business is rail. Trucking came, that is not our business. Our business is rail. They had to go bankrupt because everything was taken away and they were doing that one thing. And so it depends on this circumstances. And I think needs and tastes and demands change. And so the company can do well with that one thing, but must always be aware and ask the question, what should we be doing? Is this needed?
Yeah. So always alert all the time, also when it comes to CSR. Kofi and Annan, we discussed this earlier, and you allowed me here when we finished to ask you a question that is on everybody's minds.
Yeah.
At the moment, these days, because you are the former head of the UN, because you also were a special envoy to the Middle East, we would really like to hear your thoughts on the accord, the agreement between the USA and Russia on Syria. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that is an important breakthrough. I firmly believe that we can only make progress on the Syrian crisis when the US and Russia work together, when we get leadership from Obama and Putin. There's no military solution to the Syrian crisis. It's a very complex situation. And as you referred to our I was envoy for the Syrian crisis for both the UN and the Arab League for 6 months. And I took on the job telling the Security Council it was a difficult job, but I believe one can make contribution provided the Security Council stayed together, united, spoke with one voice, because it is when it spoke with one voice that it had a powerful voice and an impact, and provided they supported me as their envoy. And we had only one process of mediation. So I started very energetically. You may recall I came up with a 6-point plan. And then last year in June, we had the first Geneva conference where we had everybody there, Hillary Clinton, Lavrov of Russia, Ye of China, and Laurent Fabius and Hague, they were all there. We had a very good meeting, agreeing that the solution was a political settlement. We needed a transition government with all executive power, interest of all the groups. Every group in Syria must be protected, from the Shia, Alawite, to the Sunnis, to the Turkmen, Christians, Druze, Assyrians. You have so many groups. And Syria is really a mosaic that one should try and protect the interest of all. And above all, do whatever was possible to avoid a chaotic collapse. And I had expected that they will build on this after they got to New York. But when they got to New York in July last year, the fighting began again, the finger pointing, the name calling, and they didn't. Now with this agreement, which is the first one that the two countries have agreed on, I think if they can use this momentum to get the people back to the table to continue the discussions, what they are calling Geneva II. The basic document is there. The basic document for Geneva II is a communique we agreed on at the Geneva I meeting, which, as I said, talk of political settlement with the transition government. Because the only solution is a political one, which would also have a positive impact on that horrible humanitarian situation. Without a political settlement, the people of Syria are going to continue to suffer. Over 100,000 have been killed, 2 million refugees outside the country, 5 million internally displaced, and those who are today not refugees or internally displaced have struggled with daily existence. If you are sick, which hospital do you go to? If you need medication, where do you go and buy it? If you want bread and nobody is baking, what do you do? So it's a really, really horrible, it's a nightmare. And we need to take steps to get them out of this nightmare. And the way to do it is not by sending in more weapons, more military activity. It's really finding a way to get them back to the table. It's not going to be easy because you have so many parties. I mean, the Russians have offered to deliver the government, the Syrian government. The Western partners have offered to deliver the opposition, but that is tough because you have about 1,000 militia groups. How do you get them to agree a delegation? It may be possible, but it's going to take work for them to get the opposition to agree a delegation. Apart from the Syrian parties, you also need to be able to bring influential countries in the region to the table. At the first Geneva conference, I failed to get Saudi Arabia and Iran to come, and they are absolutely essential. And so we brought Qatar, Kuwait, and Iraq. But the key players are Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they have to be there at this time. Will it happen? I don't know, but let's hope and pray that this new collaboration between the Russians and the Americans will be sustained because it will make a difference. Without that leadership, we are not going to make much progress, particularly as everyone accepts there's no military solution.
So when you say that you're in your core are an optimist, you see this with optimistic view that they have gathered to this agreement now?
Yeah, there are still challenges ahead. They've come to an agreement, but you notice even a day after there was discussion as to what it means, whether Chapter 7 can be part of the agreement or not. So there are difficulties, and I think it will be unconscionable for either side or for them to let a debate on Chapter 7 unravel this, because honestly, it's a horrible way to die, to be killed with chemical weapons. But over 100,000 Syrians have been killed. The chemical weapons, the figures we are getting, Americans said 1,400 were killed, the French said 230, which is really abominable. But isn't the killing of the individual more important than how they are killed? We should stop the killing, regardless, and this is where coming to the table becomes important. That's the only way you can end it. And if they all put their weight behind it, and they all lean on the countries in the region that they have influence with, they may be able to make progress. But it's not going to be easy. And even the implementation of this agreement is not going to be easy because you're going to decommission and remove and destroy weapons in a war zone. But it could be doable.
Thank you so much on these views, Mr. Secretary General, because everything is combined with each other, and security for the whole world is also part of our future. So thank you very much for giving your answers on CSR, on global security. It has been a privilege and an honor for me to interview you today, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.